Today I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts around a witch's tools, and more specifically around a folk witch's tools. So if you're interested to learn more about this topic and my perspective, my practice, then get yourself a nice hot drink, settle back, relax and enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me again for another walk in the woods. I figured this was kind of becoming a bit of a habit to come here and occasionally chat. I mean, I like coming here and not, but if I feel the inclination and I feel that whatever I want to talk about is related or some way suits this sort of place, obviously I take the dogs for walks and don't film either in the woods or in other places, but occasionally I think it's a really nice way to share a vlog, because I feel that being in this space just frees up the mind a lot, and I've talked about that in some of the other videos as well when I've been here. When I shared the video about connecting to plant spirits, I felt that this was a really great place to do that because I was literally in the field, as it were. And I think that the expansiveness of this space and being able to be here and breathe and connect and just recenter again makes it a kind of really great place to reflect and to share from a kind of personal gnosis perspective. I may choose to come here occasionally to film a vlog to talk to you because I think it just works. It works for me. So let me know in the comments box below what you think, or if you have any suggestions or things you'd like me to talk about in this place. So walking vlogs. I did actually film this back in February, if you can believe it. I've been meaning to upload this for a very long time. It's just that other videos needed to go up before this one, essentially. So that's why I'm in a big coat and it looks kind of wintry. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about a witch's tools, and specifically a folk witch's tools, because I would identify as a folk witch myself, and that is because primarily I work on the land in which I live, connect to spirits on the land in which I live, and to plants, plant spirits, land spirits, spirits of place, tree spirits, etc. I endeavour to learn more about places that I reside and that I'm connected to. So I live in Devon, for those of you who don't know. So I'm looking at a kind of West Country folk practice and incorporating folk traditions that I've learned about from this area. So the work of Gemma Gary is particularly aligned with that. And for those of you who have read those books, you'll know as well that there are quite a lot of Christian influences within a lot of those folk prayers and traditions, and that resonates for me as well because I come from a Christian background and I do have residual Christian trauma, but a lot of that did not come from within my own family or family line that I am aware of. So I'm sure there is a lot of ancestral trauma and I'm working through that in a kind of separate line. So I do want to do more videos on working with ancestors and deconstructing my ancestry and decolonizing my spiritual practice through the lens of my ancestry. So I want to talk about that more, but that does play a factor into it. But my beloved dead, my recent ancestors, I felt very supported by them, even those who did have a strong Christian rooting. And my grandmother, for instance, I received her book of prayers after she passed, and within are the Psalms. So I utilize that for Psalm Magick and always get incredible results from that very quickly. So I would say that that plays a massive part for me as well. There's another thread to that as well. Of course, there are multiple threads to all of this, but there's another thread that flows back to my ancestry and my origins. So I've talked about this as well in other videos, and I am going to do more about this specifically, but researching into the origins of my ancestry, because obviously there's a lot of it. I know I have ancestry on one side of my family that is more Irish leaning, and then I know I obviously have Roman influence, and I know I have Nordic influence as well. And on my father's side, my grandmother, who I mentioned, she was from South Africa, of Dutch ancestry. So there is a lot to unpack there, and it's difficult because there's not as much information on Dutch folk magic as Pennsylvania Dutch kind of folk magic, braharai, powwow, and I'm making that part of my research. But I know that a lot of that is not exactly going to be identical. But like with all of those things, there's a certain level of elements being syncretized one with the other. So that is something to bear in mind as well. However, I have recently discovered content creators who do reside in the Netherlands. That has been a really awesome thing to discover. Diving more into that Dutch folk magic has been really, really enlightening. And also then looking at the folk magics of South Africa and that element of it, not claiming that, but learning about the problematic aspects of that, because a lot of that is very controversial. And there is a lot around spiritual crime, and there's just some very heinous crimes that come along with certain elements of some practitioners who practice within those areas, but then it's not a generalization. But learning about it has been incredibly eye-opening, and I'm not really able to talk about it in great depth because I'm still learning about it. But these are the areas that I'm looking into as a folk practitioner. So that is kind of a broad overview, but as it pertains to being a folk witch in Devon, on this land, it is a really important thing that I feel that I'm a steward of the land, a protector of the land. So where possible and where I can, I will do my best to pick up any litter that I find or any trash. I come and visit this place a lot with my animals, or before we had a dog, it's starting to rain. Oh, hang on. It's just started spitting. It's been raining on and off all day and it's spitting again now. The ground is so muddy, it's like really slippy, and I'm keeping the dog on the lead. This is really slippy, so I'm gonna try not to slip over. But what was I saying? For me, being able to visit the land, especially like this area of it, because we're in the woodlands and that's something that I really resonate with and connect to as a witch, it is special and important to me. And there are a number of little spots within this woodland that I feel are particularly resonant and that feel very strong in terms of spiritual activity. So visiting those and just spending some time connecting within those. I mean, a lot of the time when I come here, I'm with a dog and or with my family, so sometimes I can't stay as long as I'd like, but there's practicality to that as well. I think that speaks to the idea of like the mundaneness of a witch's life, you know. And recently Trish Beanbag Hagwad did a video about this, how a witch's practice is their whole life, and I really resonate with that as well. And I feel that as well, the topic that Trish brought up was this burnout and why people do suffer from burnout with their practice. I do understand that other people practice in different ways and everyone's experience is different, so I understand that. But also at the same time, like, I think if you are able to give yourself the grace to rest when you know you need it, then your practice can be such a salve. And that's what I found for me over the years, that leaning into the practices that are the most nourishing, the most restful, yoga nidra, for instance, not putting pressure on myself to, you know, have the perfect meditation or the perfect astral travel experience, but to just have that space of sacred rest and to be able to visit with Lilith, for instance, or the Morrigan, and to spend time within spaces such as this to connect to the plants, the trees, and the spirits of place is really powerful, and that can be such a healing salve. There are a number of times that I've come here over the years on my own, even before we had the dog, and cried next to trees, connecting to the trees, and it's been so nourishing. It's like having a therapy session, honestly, talking to the trees and asking them for support with what you're doing. And there's so much magic within that. There's so much potential for what you can do with your magic in these spaces as a folk witch or as a magical practitioner. So yeah, I completely understand that from Trisha's perspective, because what she was getting at is that this is your life as a witch, and it encompasses the whole of who you are. It isn't just picking up some herbs and putting them in a bottle and then adding some oil and that's a spell oil. It's so much more rich and in depth than that. That's a tiny little element of a practice, of someone's practice. Certainly it's part of mine, but it's a tiny element. And I know it's the sexy stuff that everyone wants to see. This is spell work and that stuff, but the real witchery is deep down in the dirt, quite literally in this dirt, right? That's where the magic is. So I really love it when other creators, practitioners do talk about that too. I'm thinking of the House of Witchcraft as well, and Taryn recently visited a graveyard and just talked about visiting with the graves there, and it was a very like real vlog and just very mundane actually. And that's so true. And quite often you can be speaking to spirits and nothing much really happens. It's a bit like just chatting to a human being sometimes. Like, it's not always this like incredible, you know, spooky experience. You know, some experiences can be like that, but oftentimes not. Sometimes it's just about spending time. So I really echo that in, I think, what I create and the way I practice and how my practice has evolved. So I feel like this tree, for instance, I could spend an hour sitting with this tree. It's so beautiful and it quite clearly has a spirit residing in it. I can tell that from just looking at it. The dog is pulling me, so I'm going to keep walking for now. Each tree has its own unique kind of essence, and I believe as well that there are spirits residing in certain trees, and there is the spirit as well of the tree as a whole, like of an oak tree, and it's almost like the overriding spirit in general. So this is coming from obviously the perspective of a folk witch who connects to spirits, and I do feel that spirit work is kind of a fundamental aspect of a witch's practice. That's my perspective, but I also understand that there are many witches who are atheists and who don't work with spirits, and that's absolutely fine for them. I'm not one to say how a practice should be. It's just, for me, I know what it feels like in my body, in my soul, and that's how I would define it for myself. So you might be watching this thinking she's not talking about tools at all, but that's kind of the point. So I could talk to you about the tools that I have. So when I started out, many of you will know if you've watched my videos, I was about 11 and I was practicing witchcraft from a Wiccan perspective because it was all synonymous and that's what all the books talked about. And so there was a whole list of the tools that you're supposed to have, and the altar setup has to be a particular way, everything with emphasis on the god and the goddess, so like the god on one side and the goddess on the other. And so you had things like the chalice that represents the womb, and the cauldron which represents the womb. You'd have the athame and the bowline, and they're more phallic in symbol, right? And the wand, it's more phallic. And so all of these things like you need to have. So you'd have salt for earth or soil, and you'd have water for water, and you'd have the candle and the flame for fire, and you'd have incense for air, or you might have like crystals or rocks. I mean, I never had a typical Wiccan altar because I didn't have that stuff. So when I started out, I talked, I think in some other videos about this, I had a little bedside table that was an antique, and it had like the loveliest smell because I don't know, I think it already had a lovely smell because of the wood it was, but I kept some incense in there, some of my candles, and I had an altar cloth, a black altar cloth. It had a lovely smell and it had a lovely vibe. I had like a paper and pen in there and some other little magical items. Like I think I had some tumblestones, amethyst and clear quartz and like a rose quartz, because my mum would sometimes buy me those when we'd go to the witchy shops. And I grew up in a place called Dunstable. If you know England, it's in Bedfordshire, and it was one of those places that was kind of associated with witchcraft, a little bit like Devon, I guess, and like places like Glastonbury. So Dunstable at various points when I was growing up in that town had a number of witchcraft shops. At one point it had one, and then it had two, and then I think at another point it had three. I remember going to various different locations, and then the one that was there the longest probably went in there the most. And I remember when I realised that it had shut, and that was really sad. And I wasn't living there by that point, but it was sad to realise that, gosh, I don't know where I'm going. Okay, this way, Banj, it is very muddy. So I never had a bowline or an athame. I didn't have a traditional wand. I didn't even really have a cauldron. I had like a fire-safe pot. I burnt a few petitions, but I would utilise other elements because of safety, really. My parents were great. They trusted me, so I did have candles and I did have incense, but I didn't use them as much in my practice as I would now. But so they were the kind of tools that you were supposed to for Wiccan practice. But I didn't have those, right? So I just leaned into what I did have. A lot of what I did have already, apart from like what I said, like the incense, the paper, the pen, pencils, and any items of power like jewellery that had been given to me by family members, or, you know, those little crystals that I had, or shells that I would find at the beach, you know, things that I felt had power in them. Other than that, I would lean into what I knew I already had, which was intuition, psychic ability, traveling on the astral, lucid dreaming. I learnt about chakras and I learnt about the aura, and I would do a lot of that kind of practicing. And I would connect to spirits, because when I was in places of power, like by the sea or in the woods and things, I would feel the elements, the power of the elements and the spirits of those elements, as well as the spirits of the land and the place. And so for me, that's what I always associate with tools from the get-go, really, because I had to develop those in order to develop my practice, even though I guess in my head I thought, this isn't really Wicca that I'm doing, because I don't have a Wiccan altar. So I never had those tools from the get-go. And now I would say that whilst there's a lot more freedom, so witches coming to the craft now will understand that they don't need to have all of those, typically Wiccan tools to develop a practice. There's still so much of an emphasis on pretty tools and the aesthetic with Pinterest and with Instagram, with TikTok, and even with YouTube. There's so much emphasis on what is sexy, what is pretty, what is witchy, with the witchy aesthetic. And I love that. There's so much value and gold in that, and it's beautiful to wear a black flowing dress, and it makes you feel witchy to have a big cauldron and to be casting some really fucking powerful shit with the cauldron, it feels witchy, and it really does help with sort of building your sense of power as a witch, and that's really important. But it's not vital, and it's not a primary tool of the craft as far as I'm concerned. So what I'm saying, again in a very roundabout way, is that coming to places of power such as this is really where the heart and exemplary of a folk witch's tools. And your toolbox, or tool bag as it were, imagine it as a metaphorical tool bag or tool belt that you wear around your waist. It's all from within you. So it comes from the energy work that I've talked about in many videos, and I've got some videos that explain a lot of those practices, like grounding and centering, and then shielding, warding, practices like that you can do energetically on the fly wherever you are without needing anything. Then there's learning about the elements that you can tap into for free. If you're going to use a candle, I guess you've got to buy a candle, or you can make a candle with leftover wax. But there's a lot of stuff in your home already that you can utilize for magic for free. And I have a video on that I filmed years ago about the mundane ways in which you can craft from things that you already have. That is really where I started. I guess because I was young and because I was reading primarily Wiccan things, my mind was probably more closed off to the things that I can do now. Still, it was nice that I had to start like that. I had to begin my practice like that because I didn't have access to all of the other tools. And I would also say that arguably today, whilst the aesthetic, there's so much emphasis on the aesthetic, it's also more confusing because there's so many different platforms telling you this, that and the other, and what to do for this, how to do this, and a spell for this and spell for that, and da-da-da. And there's way more content than anyone could ever consume. And it's overwhelming. And I think that can be really distracting and kind of confusing if you're coming to the practice of witchcraft from the start, if you're new. So I say this to say that if you are new to this practice, I want you to open your mind a little bit. Not saying that your mind isn't open already, but I want you to sort of forget everything you already have read or that you already know about what you might need in order to practice magic, or to practice spells, or to create magic in your life, or to manifest change. And just look around you and go about your daily life in a mindful way, and really be conscious, have a conscious awareness of what you are bringing with your energy, where your energy is at any one time, what might be impacting you. So if you see someone who's in a bad mood and maybe their bad mood rubs off on you a little bit, be aware of that and be mindful of it, and then check yourself and be responsible for it. And don't allow other people's energy to impact you so much or to come into your energy so much. And this is where you can do more energy work as well. So be more aware of those aspects of your life, how you're showing up, how you enter a room, how the way that you show up is impacting upon your world and upon how you see the world and your perception, and then what you are reaping, what you are manifesting as a result of that. And that's not to say that what you are manifesting is all your own creation and because of everything that you have done. I'm not saying that, think bad things are happening because you are creating them or agreeing to them in some past life. That's not a philosophy that I agree with or prescribe to. What I am saying though is that you do need to be responsible for your energy as a witch. And that is a massive thing, is a tool in your toolbox when you start to understand that, accept it, and utilize it and put it into practice. So I want to show you this as well. It's a beautiful stream that is natural, but obviously caused by the erosion of the land and then the huge amounts of water. Look at that. Huge amounts of water. But as a folk witch, and if you have access to places of power such as this, you have access to this kind of area and this kind of energy. If you've learned a bit about witchcraft already, you'll know that there are a number of things that you can do with that kind of water. You can consider where it's flowing from and where it's flowing to, and you can utilize that in your magic. You can also collect water such as that, whether it's from the flowing part of the stream or from more of a stagnant place, collected water, and utilize it in your magic for baneful uses as well as for positive uses. You know, if you wanted to release something, you might be collecting water from that flowing part of the stream. And if you were wishing to cause some stagnation for somebody else, I am not judging. Or if you're banishing someone, you might wish to utilize some of the water from the stagnant part. So I am traversing this terrain. I think this is probably the trickiest part. So then obviously, it's very obvious you have access to tools such as leaves from trees, seeds, roots, bark, sticks, stones, whole logs, which I love at Yule time because it creates a beautiful Yule log, as well as the tools that this land yields. There's obviously the spirits here, which I've talked about, and connecting to them. You don't have to connect to them here though. You could also connect to them for a while here, get to know them, repeatedly show up with a mindset of respect and with approach and asking them for their support and asking if they would like to have contact with you, if they'd like to support you in your craft. If it's a tree spirit, for instance, ask them if they would support you to ground. And then you can also ask if you can send them energy. As I said before, you can pick up any trash or any dog poo that others have left, things like that, to be a steward of the land. And then if you develop a kind of working partnerships based on mutual reception and respect, sacred reciprocity, which I talk about, whereby you're not just taking and then leaving, you revisit and make offerings of energy, water, actions to take care of the land. You can sing a lock of your hair, things like this, to really show appreciation and to show that you're showing up as a co-creator and as another being, a being connecting to another being from that animist perspective. Then if you wish to, you could evoke the energy of that spirit in your home by virtue of the fact that you may be able to harvest a few leaves or a fallen branch from that tree. So you can still connect in when you're at home. And so these are the tools that we're talking about that are actually free. I did an Instagram reel, I think last year, about a haul that I did. It was kind of a clickbait really, because it wasn't a haul in the traditional sense that I hadn't purchased anything, but I did come to these woodlands and I found some beautiful crow feathers, and it was like a walk with the Morrigan, honestly. And they just kept appearing, and I collected a few beautiful branches, some leaves, and a massive stang. I have two stangs, and one of them I would like to finish off with a topper and a foot from the Museum of Witchcraft at some point, and then another one to keep as is. But I have two that I just love. I have no idea where I am. I think it's this way. They are just beautiful tools to work with, and those were all free. And a couple of the sticks that I found made beautiful wands, and they are on my altar at the moment. So other places of power for me are definitely the ocean. I've always connected with the ocean. As a witch who does also as an art witch, one of my projects when I was doing my A-level in art actually was based on a lucid dream I had on a beach. So I did part of one of my final pieces at a beach, and it was the beach 10 minutes away from my paternal grandmother's house. So that whole experience was extremely profound and beautiful, and I've talked about it before, the sort of period of my life when I was learning about pantheism and animism and understanding that and putting it into practice, and having that whole afternoon connecting to the spirits at that particular beach was amazing. And So the seaside has always been a really special place for me. I always love going, and I know that some places you're not easily able to collect things like seashells or rocks, but if you check for your area, I have collected over the years a number of seashells and special stones, and my children have also gifted me some which are so special. These are amazing items of power that I think have so much more power than arguably the crystals that I've collected over the years as well, which now I have more knowledge and awareness about that whole mining process. I don't tend to buy new crystals anymore, but I did make a wand a number of years ago now, which was a forage stick, and I painted it and some gold wire, because gold is a really precious metal for me that I work with. I had some thin crafting gold wire and then glued a beautiful quartz point onto the top with the gold wrap. I love that wand. It's one of my favourites. There's so much magic there within these items that we forage for. So I will also link the Instagram as well if you want to go see it. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, because basically it's a really powerful haul. You don't need to go to a witchcraft shop and buy a ton of crystals. You know, you might want to buy a book, but you don't even need to buy books really anymore. A lot of them are online on apps like Scribd. You can get an Audible subscription, and there are a number of books on Audible for free. And you can also utilise your library services. And if you're going to buy a book, of course, if you know you need to use something like Amazon, you can. But then going to your bookshops and asking them to order in a book for you is such a good way to support your local shops. I am an Amazon affiliate if people wish to utilise the link, but I fully encourage you to go ahead and just ask your bookseller to purchase the book for you, and then you go and pick it up yourself there. But if you are in a place where that's not accessible for you, as I know many people are, then it's a lot easier to sometimes make an order on Amazon. So I offer those there for that reason. So we've talked about the typical tools, we've talked about your everyday practice, we've talked about places of power as spirits of place, and we've talked about connecting to the spirits of place, and we've talked about items of power that you can ask to take away and utilise within your practice. On that note as well, I mentioned crow feathers earlier. I understand that in parts of the USA you are not allowed to take certain things such as feathers away from the land, and certain species you're not supposed to remove their bones or any remains. So just check out your local law on that. Another obvious thing is ancestral ties and any items that you may be gifted from your ancestry, or any hand-me-downs from past loved ones, etc., that you might want to utilise in your practice. I feel that also if you are still living on the land in which your ancestors lived as well, that's incredibly powerful and would add another layer of dimension to your practice. I briefly talked about elements as well. I think they're quite fundamental in terms of learning about witchcraft, and I would suggest if you are new to the practice and maybe you're in the closet or you don't have the budget to spend on lots of tools, in addition to accessing the kind of places and resources that I mentioned already, I would recommend that you learn more about the elements, energy work, energy practices, and really dive deep into those, as well as if you're wanting to work more with spirits, ways to connect to plant spirits, tree spirits, spirits of the land. I would recommend that you focus your research on that, as well as your ancestors, how to work with your ancestors and your actual family line and family tree. But it does depend on what you're interested in as well. And obviously I'm kind of talking for the benefit of someone who I imagine might be quite new to this. Developing your own practice comes with time, comes with belief in yourself and your understanding, and being able to develop and strengthen your technique and your practice of certain exercises that you feel are helpful and supportive in your practice. So just because I'm here talking about what I talk about, just because another content creator talks about what they talk about, just because you might have read some books, everyone is on a journey of their own. Everyone will have certain things that they lean towards and certain things that they lean less towards, and that's very natural. But we're all still people and we're all still learning the practice ourselves. So if something doesn't work for you, leave it and take what does. Take what resonates, leave the rest. From my perspective as a folk witch, these are the things that I've leaned into. I think as well as the elements, learning about the seasons of the land in which you live and the ecology of the land and the history of the land is very important. So what is where and what might have been there before, and the seasons of the land. So what is popping up first in spring, or does spring start later? What is the climate? And so looking into all of these aspects of the land that you're on and creating your own wheel of the year, as it were. I mean, I tend to celebrate the typical Sabbats in a neo-pagan way because the area that I am in, they align quite well. But I will also just follow where my body is and where the land is. So I don't, because my climate is quite in line, sort of, with the traditional Sabbats, and because the people I tend to celebrate with are on those types of paths, I do tend to lean into them. But I'm not prescriptive with it for myself and my own practice. I do what I feel is right. And that is kind of a witch's prerogative to do so, and to lean into what is right for you, and to really intuit into the energies at the time and the energies of yourself and what is right for you. And that is where, again, we come into this idea of intuitive witchcraft, which I've talked about a lot, and about the practice being inside you, and it's your whole life. It is you. It's not just something you do on the weekend when you're not at work. It's every single little thing you do. And that's why probably the thing I would say to take away is the mindfulness piece, the consciousness piece. So looking at every single part of your life, every single part of your day, what you do, stripping it back, how are you showing up, what is impacting you, what leaves a bit of a nasty taste in your mouth, examining it, getting to know yourself. What are your limits? What are your boundaries? What are your morals? Like, what's your ethical stance on this stuff? What do you care about? What inspires you? What fires you up? And what are you willing to fight for? And what are your boundaries? What are your limits, as I said? And knowing this will help you to craft a path that is unique for you, and also help to strengthen your own resolve. I'm stuck in a bog. And strengthen your belief in yourself as a witch, which is so powerful. So another thing that comes to mind as well, if you are new to sort of looking into this area of practice, is looking into the history of it and understanding what you're claiming. So the word witch, for instance, I had to do a lot of research for myself when I was older in the practice about the word and how it was maligned and what it actually means. So reading texts like The Witch by Ronald Hutton, reading The Stations of the Sun, etc., those kinds of things are great for understanding this. And then leaning into the works of Kelden, for instance, because Kelden talks a lot about the witchcraft trials from a traditional witchcraft perspective. Whilst they are often put together, there is a difference between traditional witchcraft and folk witchcraft, which I have talked about briefly on my channel, but I do feel that there's like a Venn diagram there, they kind of cross over. I've also talked about Hearth witchery as well, because an element of a folk witch's practice is undeniably the fact that it's by the people for the people, and that practice is to benefit. It's not theurgical, it's thaumaturgical, in that it is to bring about a change of some kind that is necessary. So a lot of the time it would have been about healing. Occasionally it was about cursing. Whilst it is thaumaturgy in its essence, in terms of it being manifesting in reality, it is often via our connections to spirit that enable this. So a lot of folk magics will employ the Psalms and also biblical verses, and obviously there was that syncratism between the folk beliefs that were prevalent before Christianity, before the rise of Christianity, and then how they were syncretized together in order to keep some of those practices alive. But yeah, so they existed together. So I just wanted to make that clear that whilst, yes, it's thaumaturgical, there was still a theurgical aspect in that there was the praying to and petitioning of gods and spirits. However, it wasn't theurgical in the sense that it was about having that union again with a god. And learning about those aspects of witchcraft or folk healing, folk charms from your ancestry, from where you are based, is really powerful. So you can start to understand those things about your area and those things about your ancestry. I would also suggest that along with hearth witchcraft, folk witchcraft and traditional witchcraft are also related very much so to hedge witchcraft, and this idea of crossing the hedge, or astral travel, astral projection as it's also called, spirit flight, witch flight, and travelling to the witch's sabbat. And I have discussed that on my channel as well in previous videos, and certain books that are really great to read along those lines as well. So as folk witchcraft relates to hearth witchcraft, it is in the herbal remedies, the tinctures, the syrups, the charms, the folk charms, the wart cunning, healing, all kinds of things, cuts, bruises, worms was a word that came up a lot. You know, these are traditional remedies, but a lot of them still have weight and a lot of them are still utilised. And there is still an active powwow community. Depending on where you are, you know, I'm imagining a lot of people watching are in the Americas. So reading some of those books that I recommended in my recent video would be so amazing. I would definitely recommend The Long Lost Friend, which is one of the oldest grimoires of powwow, Pennsylvania Dutch powwowing, Brachai grimoire, about Appalachian witchcraft, about the folk magics of North America. For me, it's more British and obviously, as I said, Dutch, but reading the North American folk books really support because there's that syncratism as well, as I've talked about. So you can start to maybe bring in some of the herbal remedies that your family utilised yourself. I know I've practiced a folk charm on my son that my mum used to do for me for actual healing of warts, which I remember when I was at school, I've got these horrible warts on my hand. It's obviously because kids are like bacteria monsters, right? So I must have had like a cut or a graze on my hand and then some bacteria went in and got a wart. And what my mum told me is that you need to ignore it, act like it's not there. It literally worked. So the first few had arrived and I started this process getting them burnt off at the doctor's. It was gross. And she was like, you need to imagine, if you see it, you need to act like it's just not there. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, no, seriously, it actually works. So you just have to ignore it. And it literally worked. So I did the same for my son, but actually utilising a potato and it worked a treat. So this kind of wart charm is a sort of transference-based magic in which you rub the potato, or it could be other items, on the wart, and then the idea is it's transferred to the potato and then it is disposed of. It could be used with other objects or coins, or essentially it's a transference charm. So because the potato was something that would have been used by my ancestors at certain points. And so these kinds of things are so rich in history and tradition. Not only that is the cooking, the food of your ancestry and the land that you live on and the land that you are from. So you can look into all of these. And it may be that some of these aspects are harder for you to trace if you are adopted or you don't know a certain part of your family line. But you work with what you have, and remember that ancestors aren't only your blood relatives. They can be powerful ancestry by way of connection. They're like the mighty dead, for instance. So it might be some amazing people that you align with who practice witchcraft or folk magics from your area, from your origin, from what you know of it. Or it might be that you had an adopted family, and those practices that would have been theirs or would have been their ancestors, you can tap into those as well because they were your ancestors too. Ancestry is not just blood related, and we can talk more about that in another video too, because this is not specifically about ancestry, but you get the point. So I've really waffled, and I hope that it's been supportive, enlightening, enjoyable, helpful. There are a number of tools that I'm sure I have not mentioned that a folk witch can utilise and lean into in their practice. I know I have utilised many over the years, and often the most powerful working is the one that you do on the fly, the one that you didn't plan, the one that you just pick up a stick, for instance, create a charm, speak words of power and intention, blow your energy, release the energy, and it's done, and it manifests. Some of those workings are the most powerful. So I'm about to lose my battery, and I would just like to say that I want to empower you to create and craft the best practice that you can, and to believe in yourself and your power. That is fundamental, and I do believe it is possible for everyone to have a powerful practice. So I want to empower you to do that. So I would like to say I'm going to make some more offerings available on my Patreon, which I would love you to go ahead and join if you'd like to support me. Some journal prompts recently and a tarot spread, and I'm going to be creating more video content over there. I'd love you to go over and join. Also, you can catch me on Instagram as well, where you can follow what I'm up to, or you can like, share, subscribe. Super thanks below, or there's a direct link to PayPal or a Buy Me a Coffee page as well. Leave me a comment below, let me know what the elements, the tools of your practices are. I'd love to hear, and where you're at with your practice, especially if you're a folk practitioner, I'd love to hear, but in general, where your witchcraft is going and what is powerful for you in your practice. Thank you so much for joining me. Please leave me a tree emoji if you made it to the end. Please like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment below. I look forward to seeing you again in another video really soon. Many blessings. Mwah. Bye. No, this is not going to work. Okay. Are your little legs cold? Oh.